Chapter 21, Bones in a Box. Tempestra smiled at me, then looked back at Mum. Sorry, madam. She removed her tricorn hat and bowed low, then turned and poked a slender finger into the end of Grogber's nose. We've been searching for this grottish little blunker for years. Why? Mum said with a quivering voice. Who are you? The pirate girl tucked her sword back into her belt, then reached up, grabbed Mum's hand and shook it. I am Tempestra Plank, first mate on board the Blistered Barnacle, she said, pointing back at the ship. The boy's right. My father is Captain Calamitous Plank, the scourge of the Seven Sewers. This slug-dropping, she pointed at Prince Grogber, stole his most precious treasure, and we've come to take it back. Everybody oohed and ahed. There wasn't anyone in the magical world that hadn't heard of the wild adventures of Captain Plank.
Let me go!
Grogber yelled, wriggling in the clutches of the pirate crew.
On second thoughts, I really don't know what you're chittering on about. I haven't got anything that belongs to you.
Where are they? Tempestra snapped.
Haven't got a clue.
Where are my father's diamonds?
Never heard of them.
Grogber spluttered. Tell us! The prince started squirming and twisting even harder, so that the pirate struggled to keep hold of him.
I'll never tell.
Grogber screamed, just as he jerked sideways and stepped into a shaft of moonlight that was slanting through the hole in the reception wall. Suddenly, the room was filled with hundreds of tiny stars as something near the prince's head reflected the moonbeam in every direction. Aha! Tempestra marched over to Grogber and yanked the brooch off the front of his turban. Got them!
No, my diamonds!
Grogber whined as his enormous feather drooped and fell to the floor.
Stop snivelling!
One of the crew members said to Grogber as he tied up the prince's hands and feet. Tempestra held the little treasure up to the light, and for the first time I saw that it wasn't a crescent moon-shaped brooch at all. It was a pair of diamond-encrusted false teeth. Go and get Dad, Tempestra said to her crew, and two pirates ran back to the ship and climbed on board. Moments later, they reappeared on the deck, lugging a wooden chest.
Heave-ho!
They chanted together, and threw the box down to the other crew members. Wait a minute, my dad said, scratching his head. Captain Plank is in there? Yes, said Tempestra. In a treasure chest? Yep. Well, let him out, Dad said, looking starstruck. He was a huge fan of the captain's stories, just like me. It mustn't be very comfortable. Would you like some tea? Tempestra lifted the lid and everybody crowded round to look inside the box. Oh my goodness, Mum gasped. He's very skinny, the Molar sisters said. He looks delicious, said Gladys Potts. She instantly sprouted fluffy white hair and turned into a poodle. I pushed through the huddle of guests, reached the edge of the wooden chest, and looked inside. It's, I said. It's just bones, Dad finished my sentence. Had the crew of the Blistered Barnacle gone mad? Why on earth were they chasing Prince Grogber for all this time when their captain was a skeleton? Not even a skeleton, really, just a pile of bones, with a toothless skull sitting on top. Why do you think we needed the diamond dentures? Tempestra said. Watch. She reached inside the chest and carefully placed the glittering teeth into the skull's mouth. Blah! Quicker than a firework, the bones reassembled, and we suddenly found ourselves staring into the empty eye sockets of a goblin skeleton, standing waist high in a treasure chest. Oh, I feel like I've been bone-jangled. What? I said. This isn't right. My brain started racing again. In my books, Captain Plank was a goblin with hair and skin and eyes, not a skeleton. Dad! Tempestra threw her arms round the skeleton and roughly hugged it. The skeleton spat the teeth back out in surprise, and hundreds of little bones clattered back into the box. Tempestra turned to face us with Captain Plank's skull in her hands. "Oops," she said, rolling her eyes. "See, this happens a lot." She bent down, picked the diamond dentures up off the floor, and placed them back between Calamitus's jaws. "What?" The bones were instantly a skeleton again. "Blimey, I've got a headache." "Dad," Tempestra said again, "welcome back." "Eh?" Captain Plank looked at his daughter. "Back? Where have I been?" The skeleton turned its head and noticed us all crowding round the treasure chest he was standing in. "Hello," Mum said. "We're thrilled to have you here," Dad joined in. "Who are you?" Captain Plank croaked. "What's going on?" Tempestra tapped Calamitus on his bony shoulder, then pointed to a mirror that was hanging on the nearby wall. The captain swivelled round to look at his reflection and stared for a moment. It's very hard to guess the emotions of a skeleton. Who knew eyebrows were so important? "Oh, blunkers! I'd forgotten about the bone thing," he said. Just then, a small growl from somewhere up above caught our attention. It wasn't a very loud growl, but it echoed off the broken walls, and even Captain Plank looked about, clacking his teeth. I turned and glanced up to the first floor landing, where the huge chunk of staircase had been smashed away. And there, curling its little toes over the edge, was Gerp. "Gerp," Mum said, "what on earth are you doing down here?" Clomp, 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 clomp. Something very large and very heavy was coming down the stairs from high above. "Oh no," said Dad. Clomp, 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 clomp. "Oh dear," Nancy mumbled under her breath. "I think all this noise might have woken your worst nightmare." Granny Regurgita rounded the last twist of the spiral staircase and grimaced down at us. She didn't say anything else at first, and just looked about at the smashed front door, tied up Goblin Prince, skeleton standing in a treasure chest, and pirate ship sticking through the wall. Then she fixed her copper eyes on me, Mum and Dad. "Someone's got a whoopsie load of explaining to do." Chapter 22. The Curse of the Diamond Dentures. "Granny Regurgita," Dad said. "Granny, I can explain." "Go on then, Bargius, you snivelling little dollop of snot," Granny said. Believe it or not, that's one of the nicest things she's ever said to Dad. "Well," Dad started sweating, "there were crabs." "Crabs?" Granny raised one bristly eyebrow. "Yes, and a big boom in the garden, and Gladys Potts's mattress." "Go on." "And skinny dipping, that ship over there. Oh, and the lawn screamed." Granny Regurgita was gawping at Dad like he'd gone round the twist. "Phew," Dad said, smiling with relief. "Now it's all much clearer now." I'd never seen my granny looking lost for words before. "Ahem." Calamitous Plank stepped out of the treasure chest and walked forward. "I think I might be able to clear this whole messy thing up," he said. "Who are you?" Granny grunted. "Oh, come on, Regurgita, you know me." The skeleton smiled a flashy diamond smile. "I've never clapped my pippers on you in my life." "What's the matter?" Captain Plank chuckled. "Don't you recognise old Calamitus without his skin?" Granny Regurgita gasped. And, well, I think she might even have smiled.
Calamitous Plank? Is that you old sea slug?
The very same. The skeleton gave a little bow. Granny scooped Gerp up in her massive arms and jumped off the broken staircase. She landed with an enormous thump that made the ground shake.
What have you done to yourself?
She asked, putting Gerp down on the wet floor.
Where's all your punch? And your skin? And your...
She paused.
Face?
It's a long story, Calamitous said, scratching bony fingers against the top of his skull with an ear-bursting squeak. I told a sea witch I loved her.
Oh, how lovely,
Nancy said.
It was,
Calamitous continued.
The trouble was, I also told a mermaid I loved her. Oh, that's never a good idea.
The Molar sisters joined in.
That's right,
Calamitous said, shaking his head.
My witchy love found out and flash crackle. I'm a walking skeleton with magical teeth that everyone wants to steal. Magpies are a nightmare. But how does that explain all this mess?
Granny said, shuffling about, surveying the damage. Everyone turned and stared at Prince Grogber, who had been tied up with so much rope he looked more like a ball of wool than a goblin.
Don't look at me, peasants,
he spat. Him, Tempestra said, striding up next to her father and pointing at the Goblin Prince.
Tempestra Plank,
Granny said, eyeing the pirate girl.
Last time I saw you, you were squincier than a squabbling.
It's been a long time, Tempestra said. Most of it has been spent with Dad in a box, searching for this thieving Goblin Prince.
The last thing I remember, Calamitous said, we were sailing through a sewer that led right through the Dookie Deep. I toddled over to the railing of my ship, you know, to do me business over the side, and a bunch of Grogber's cronies grabbed me and nabbed me dentures before I could even take a tinkle.
And you've been on the run ever since? Dad asked Grogber. You should be ashamed of yourself, said Mum.
I couldn't help it.
The prince snapped back.
The diamonds were really shiny. I like shiny things. I want shiny things.
Well, what's to be done now?
Granny Regurgita said.
Everyone knows it's goblin law that a wrong can only be righted by a blunking big battle. I'm quite tired,
Calamitous said. He flexed his arms and they cracked loudly.
Do we have to?
But Prince Grogber yelled,
Gods!
And the huge reception hall suddenly filled with barrow goblins. They hadn't run off at all. Those sneaky little blighters had gone to round up the rest of the troops, knowing that they would need to fight the pirates. Grogber's army came pouring out of the dining room, and from the garden there was even a battalion waiting on the stairs with their spears raised and ready. Granny Regurgita looked at Calamitous and winked.
I think that answers your question, she said.
Chapter 23. Get 'em! All at once Grogber's guards flew into action. They darted towards the prince to untie him, while others started charging at us, swinging weapons above their heads.
Oh, no you don't!
Granny Regurgita bellowed. She ploughed into the horde of goblin soldiers like a demented rhinoceros, sending pumpkin-sized bodies flying into the air. Rawr! Calamitous tripped a passing guard and snatched his sword in mid-air.
Let's see if there's life in me old bones yet.
I looked at Mum, who nodded at me, then grabbed an umbrella from the hatstand and threw it. Let 'em have it, Frankie! She yelled over the din as she picked up a mop and whacked a goblin in the face with it. In no time at all, the hotel was a mass of flailing limbs, jabbing spears and bits of furniture flying through the air. Hooligans! Lady Leonora exploded a jet of ectoplasm into the faces of 3 snarling soldiers.
Aye!
A goblin guard sailed past my head and landed in the fountain with a huge splash. Take that! I turned round just in time to see Tempestra Plank
shoot one of the chandeliers, which came crashing down onto a gaggle of goblin heavies. It was dizzying to take in. Nancy had clambered up the wall and was shooting great nets of spiderweb at unsuspecting guards and then hoisting them into the air. "Don't think you'll get away with this," she shouted at the wriggling little soldiers. I ran towards the fountain, batting guards aside with my umbrella, trying to get a better view of the room. I'd nearly made it when I had to hurdle Gladys Potts as she scampered past with a broom handle between her teeth, tripping goblins left and right.
Ooh! Ah! Ooh!
The battle was now raging all over the place, but all I could think of was Grogber. Where had the rotten whelp gone? I had to find him. "Frankie!" I heard Dad's voice yell. I turned round and almost burst out laughing at what I saw. There Dad was with the vacuum cleaner nozzle aimed right at the top of the royal shouter's head. The little twerp's knot of red hair had been sucked up, and he was thrashing about like a fish on the end of a hook. "That way!" Dad pointed at the library. "Grogber went that way!" I sprinted towards the library, ducking under one of Grogber's henchmen as he shook about in mid-air. For a second I thought it was magic, until I noticed the ratty toupee in front of him. "Ha! Good on you, Alf!" I shouted. When I reached the archway to the library, I stopped and watched with a mixture of shock and delight as a squad of goblin swordsmen were pelted with books by the dustbooks, who were hurling them at a surprising speed for potato-sized little chunks. But where was the prince? On the other side of the library, Madame Macready was swatting at some of Grogber's sour-faced wives with a feather duster. The wives were whipping back at her with long strings of pearls that dangled off their fancy gowns. "Oh, I'm getting bored of this," screeched Madame Macready, then let rip a banshee wail so loud that the wives were bowled backwards and straight through the wall into the kitchen. "And don't come back!" For a second all I saw through the hole were scurrying feet and smashing plates. But then I caught a glimpse of pink robes with tiny gold embroidered flowers hurrying past. "Gotcha," I said to myself. I ran to the hole in the wall and ducked down to look through it. Sure enough, there was the prince, waddling along the edge of the kitchen to avoid all the fighting and then ducking into the conservatory. But I knew he wasn't going to stop there. Grogber was heading for the garden. Chapter 24. Where is Grogber? I raced towards the kitchen. Why hadn't I thought of it before? If the prince made it to the garden, he'd escape back through the boulder he'd arrived in and get away with everything. The kitchen was just as chaotic as the rest of the hotel. "Take that and this!" The Molar sisters were clutching their wands and had conjured up a tornado of plates and cups in the middle of the room. Cutlery and all kinds of jars, pans and utensils whizzed past, bouncing off the cupboards and shelves and pelting the royal sorcerers. The ancient goblin wizards chanted spells and threw their smoke pellets, but they didn't stand a chance against the tooth fairy triplets. "You call that magic?" Dentina laughed over the tornado. "Ha!" Gingiva laughed. "Nonsense!" "Your beard looked marvellous in the window," Flora added, grinning. I ran into the kitchen and barged straight past the royal sorcerers, knocking them stumbling across the room.
Stop!
A wheezy voice croaked. I turned just in time to see a grizzled goblin wizard in his biscuit tin-sized wheelchair careering towards me.
I'll get you, you snotling!
"Oh, stop your madness!" The Molar sisters laughed, and they flicked their wands, and I flew into the air, just as the old grunion sped past underneath me and clattered down the steps to Oof's basement. "Where to, sweetie?" They cackled, dancing about in their magical storm. "The garden!" I hollered. "Fast as you can!" The Molar sisters swatted their wands in my direction, and the tornado of crockery suddenly wrapped itself around me. Fast as a rocket, I flew straight through the door to the conservatory and hurtled above the rows of Mr. Crocom's flowers, ferns and huge mushrooms in plant pots. Below me, running this way and that, I saw Tempestra's pirate crew beating back a gaggle of goblin guards.
Most of them had lost their weapons by now and were just hurling gardening tools at each other, but I was pleased to see that it looked like the pirates were winning. I reached the far end just in time to see Reginald Blink throw a potted cactus at a small running figure dressed in gold darting through the door to the garden. It was Grogber. I'd nearly caught up with him. As the tornado of crockery, with me in the middle of it, whizzed out through the end of the conservatory, the Molar Sisters' spell instantly vanished, and I skidded onto the mound at the centre of the lawn with plates and cups smashing all around me. Ooh! The lawn woke up for the second time in 24 hours. Oh, sorry, I huffed. I felt like I'd just been put through a long spin in a tumble dryer. I dizzily stood up and looked about. There was no way I was going to let the prince escape. You're standing on my face, the lawn grumbled. Get off! I wobbled down the mound and headed for the bare patch of mud with the boulder jutting out of it. Please let the door still be closed. Please let the door still be closed. Phew, it was. Prince Grogber may have made it as far as the garden, but he hadn't got through into the golden hallway yet. And if I stayed near the boulder, he wouldn't be able to open the door without dealing with me first. I squinted my eyes and peered into the towering flower bed, searching for a pumpkin-shaped figure. It was at times like this that I loved having troll blood in my veins. Seeing in the dark was a piece of cake, except the brilliant glowing petals and leaves that burst out in all directions only made the shadows between them seem even darker. I couldn't spot the prince, but I knew he'd probably spotted me, and I needed to be ready. Growl! I spun round and gasped. Up on the patio, I saw Hoggett struggling and thrashing about as two of Grogber's royal guards had lashed ropes around the little dragon's snout and were pulling him towards the swimming pool. No! I'm sure you've probably guessed by now, but soot dragons die if they get wet. I didn't have a choice. Abandoning my post at the boulder door, I sprinted across the garden and leaped up the patio steps. I don't think I'd ever been so angry in my life. I could feel Granny Regurgita's troll blood bubbling up inside my belly. Get away from him, I bellowed. That's my dragon. I grabbed the two soldiers by their red topknots and yanked them off the ground. They dropped the ropes and started kicking their stumpy legs.
Let go!
They squeaked.
Let go!
Up here, darling.
Mrs. Dunce shouted. She was clambering up the steps of the water slide.
Throw 'em!
One after another, I swung the goblins into the air.
Aye!
They arced up over the pool, and Beryl Dunch batted them with her fishtail with a loud, wet slap. I couldn't help feeling a bit sorry for the goblin guards when they both landed head first in the manure pile by the potting shed. But that's what you get for messing with Frankie Bannister. And that was the moment everything went really crazy. Chapter 25. Brunched. Brace yourself. We've arrived at the big climatic ending of the story. Ready? Are you sure? Okay, here we go. I pulled the ropes off Hoggett's snout and bent down to pick him up. The poor little thing was trembling with fear and whimpering quietly. It's okay, buddy, I said, stroking his scaly head. You're safe now. Bundling him up under my arm, I stood up to see Grogber making a run for it across the lawn.
You'll never get me, you rancidorous peasant!
As if the magic doors had sensed Grogber was getting close, they began to creak open.
You actually thought a squivelling scrub like you could defeat a huxon prince like me?
The door opened further. In a few seconds, it would be too late. I was about to jump over the patio wall and try my luck at catching up with Grogber, when I noticed Hoggett was getting really hot under my arm. I looked down and saw a fierce glow coming from between his lumpy scales. My little pet began to vibrate, and a rumbling sound echoed out through his open mouth. Then, for the first time ever,
Hoggett let rip the most tremendous spray of fire I'd ever seen. It exploded through the air and engulfed the boulder completely. Grogber screamed and reeled backwards. "What's going on?" Mum cried, running out of the conservatory.
"Hoggett!"
Dad yelled as he joined her. I couldn't turn round with Hoggett shooting fire through the air, but I could hear the sounds of the hotel guests and the pirate crew assembling behind me.
"Look at him go!" Calamitous shouted. "Stupendous!"
"Keep Hoggett aimed in the right direction, Frankie," Mum told me.
"Melt that boulder!"
said Dad. I could feel he was practically hopping with excitement. The night air began to fill with the sour burning smell as the boulder started to glow yellow, then purple, and finally white.
"It's gonna blow!"
the Molar sisters wailed together.
"Fill it good and popper, Frankie!"
Grogber was frozen to the spot with a look of terror on his face. He watched as great globs of molten rock started pouring down the sides of his escape route and splashing on the scorched earth.
"Has anyone got any marshmallows?"
the Molar sisters continued as blob, blub, gloop, plop. A huge gurgling sound erupted from beneath the boulder, and it sank into the ground, oozing back the way it had come in a tremendous lava flow. There was silence for a moment, until all eyes slowly turned to Grogber. The toady little sneak had his mouth hanging open like it was trying to catch flies. Then he glanced up and saw the patio was crowded with guests and goblin pirates, and he jolted back to his senses.
Hey! Hey!
Grogber glared at me. He looked like he was about to be sick with rage.
I hate you! I hate all dirtish, putrid, puffy-faced, spine-jangled, weakly, commonless, mugsome, stupid humans, but I especially hate you!
One of the goblin guards that Mrs. Dunch had whacked across the garden had dropped his sword as he flew through the air. It was sticking up out of the edge of the flower bed, and Grogber made a lunge for it.
I'm going to poke holes in you and your manxome little dragon and use it as a tea strainer!
The prince screamed at me.
"Not so fast!"
Calamitous hopped over the patio wall down to the lawn.
"Aren't you forgetting something, Prince Grogbog?"
said Granny. She lumbered down the patio steps and joined Captain Plank. The prince sneered at them both.
"The bristly battle has been fought and won, and now, as is the goblin way, it's time for punishments,"
Calamitous said.
Yes, I know!
Grogber hissed.
That's why I'm taking you all as slaves! Form an orderly queue!
"You brain-bungled boggart!" Tempestra pointed a sword at the prince. "You lost!"
Has she gone mad?
Grogber laughed. "It's true," said Gladys Potts.
"We beat your guards."
Reginald Blink grinned.
"I might have a few for breakfast in the morning,"
Granny said with a crooked smirk. "Oh yes," Madame Macready said, patting her stomach greedily. "Delicious."
"Oof, squish,"
said Oof. Prince Grogber's face flinched for the tiniest of seconds. The corner of his eye twitched, and he started opening and closing his mouth at a rapid pace. I could almost see the cogs whirring inside his tiny brain.
Lost?
"'S right," Calamitous said. "You and your army of grunty gawpers have lost. Right now my crew are taking them on board the blistered barnacle, where they'll be fed and armed and become salty-eyed sea donks. The only plunkling left to deal with is you."
Please don't kill me!
Grogber wailed.
I'm too beautiful to die.
Calamitous laughed.
"Kill you?" he said. "We're not going to kill you."
You're not?
Grogber smiled with relief.
"Nope."
Calamitous walked slowly towards the prince.
"The thief of the diamond dentures has to pay a far more gut-bunkling price for their terrible crime."
What price?
Grogber's bottom lip started to tremble.
"Oh, it's terrible. Calamitous leered and clicked his diamond teeth together.
But it's not death.
No,
Phew, and at least it's not that.
Grogba said. For stealing the diamond dentures, Prince Grogba. Your sentence is to spend the rest of your miserable days as Chief of Laundry on board my ship.
What?
You'll sew and wash and dry and scrub, and after a long time at sea, my crew can get very smelly indeed.
Kill me!
Grogba howled.
Please, kill me!
Not a chance.
With that, Grogba brandished his sword again and started walking slowly backwards. His eyes were the size of dinner plates, and he was mumbling gibberish under his breath. There's nowhere to go, Grogba, Dad said. The Goblin Prince was squelching backwards through the flower bed, waggling his sword to and fro.
Here, watch my flowers, Mr. Crocombe grumbled from the crowd.
Stuff, you stupid flowers!
Grogba spat at him.
I'm Prince Grogba, and I always win.
He backed further and further away from us, swinging his sword about, until he passed into a shadowy spot, with a row of thorny-looking spikes above and below it. For a second, I couldn't quite make out what I was looking at, but then I realised. "Grogba!" I yelled. "Come back!"
Never!
The prince was walking backwards, straight into the open mouth of a snoring, sharp-toothed
Borgunzer!
Mr. Crocombe shouted at his sleeping wife, "Mrs. Venus!" Everyone joined in, but it was too late. Prince Grogba stepped on the back of her tongue and... gulp! Mrs. V clamped her teeth shut, swallowed, and smacked her lips sleepily. She slowly raised her enormous head on her stork neck and shook her tendrils awake.
Bleh. I've got a horrible taste in my mouth,
she said, yawning. That's when she noticed the gaggle of guests and staff all standing below her, staring up in shock and surprise.
Ooh, I must have nodded off. Has the prince arrived yet?
Chapter 26. Weird is the new normal. Now come on, admit it. You started this book thinking, what a load of old codswallop. And now I bet you'd love to come and stay in the Nothing to See Here hotel. No one really knew what to do after we had watched Grogba vanish into the thorny jaws of Mrs. V, so we all plodded back to the wrecked reception hall and waited for someone to come up with an idea. Nancy brought everyone mugs of steaming stag beetle tea, and we scuffed about in the dust and rubble, looking a bit bamboozled. It was Granny who finally broke the silence.
Right, that's enough, she barked. Clear off.
Well, you weren't expecting her to say something nice, were you?
My bunions need their bed, and I'm sick of looking at your pukish faces. Right you are, Mrs. Glump, Calamitous said with a grin. This old scrunt is ready to smell the salty sewer air again anyway.
He shouted orders to his crew, and in no time the squall goblins were boarding their ship and conjuring up another magical wave to wash them back down to the water's edge. I couldn't help but feel sad that the hero of my favourite books was leaving before I'd had time to get to know him. I watched as he clacked across the dusty tiles towards the blistered barnacle. Captain Plank took hold of a rope hanging down from the deck above, and just when I thought he was about to climb up and leave, he turned his hollow skeleton eyes on me.
Abraham would have been splendidly proud of you, my boy, he said,
then beckoned with a bony finger. I walked over to the pirate captain with my heart pounding in my ears.
A small reward, methinks.
Calamitous yanked a single diamond tooth out of his dentures and dropped it in my hand.
Keep it safe,
he said, and winked. Who knew skulls could do that?
You never know when it will come in handy.
And with that, he swung up onto the deck. And the last thing I saw of the squall goblins was Tempestra and Calamitous waving from the stern of their ship. And that was that. Mum and Dad set to work with the enchanted mops and brooms, and the Molar sisters made light work of repairing the walls and staircase with their wands. Before I knew it, everyone was plodding off to bed, and it was almost as if Prince Grogber had never visited at all. Don't forget what I told you right back at the start. There's always some kind of mega drama happening at the Nothing to See Here hotel. So that was a pretty average day for most of us. Storms and messengers and ravens and parties and exploding boulders and parades and skinny dipping and plagues of hermit crabs and criminals and diamonds and pirates and heroes and skeletons and curses and battles and fireballs, the odd person getting gobbled up, are all just regular stuff for the Bannister family. Here, where weird is the new normal. Still fancy coming to stay? Well, that's the end of the story, everybody. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed reading it. It really is a great, great story. And Stephen Butler and Stephen Lenton have written and illustrated other books in this series. So if you want to grab a copy of this one or of these two to see what happens next, do it and enjoy. Okay, bye-bye.